That was what I was told by Irving.
The spotlight often captured what the audience wanted to see, an electric connection between Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. A chemistry so undeniable that it seemed almost theatrical in its intensity. On stage, their harmonies melted into each other, their glances held longer than a beat, and their presence made magic. But what fans couldn't see, what no camera could catch, was the turbulent storm that brewed offstage. The truth was far from poetic. It was bruised by jealousy, control, and a love that had once burned bright but now left ash in its wake. Behind every hit song was a scar. Stevie wrote dreams about Lindsay, melancholic and ethereal, like a message whispered in the dark. Lindsay fired back with Go Your Own Way, his words seething with frustration. These weren't just songs. They were public diary entries, full of emotion they couldn't speak aloud. When the band's manager, Irving Azoff, told Lindsay he was out of the band, it wasn't because of creative differences or money disputes. It was Stevie. She had issued an ultimatum: either he goes or I do. And for those who knew the backstory, it wasn't a surprise. But to understand that moment, we have to go back to a time before the music, before the heartbreak, back to the little girl who couldn't pronounce her own name. Stephanie Lynn Nicks entered the world on May 26, 1948, in Phoenix, Arizona. She was born into a family constantly on the move, her father, Jess Nicks, climbing the corporate ladder at a rapid pace, eventually becoming president of Armour and an executive vice president at Greyhound. But success meant uprooting. The Nicks family lived like modern nomads, shifting homes from Phoenix to Los Angeles, El Paso to Chicago, and everywhere in between. Each new city meant starting over, new schools, new friends, new rhythms of life. As a child, little Stephanie struggled to pronounce her own name. Instead, she called herself Ted. That nickname slowly evolved, eventually becoming the name the world would know, Stevie. That moment of reinvention, subtle as it was, became a theme in her life. Identity, for Stevie Nicks, would never be fixed. It would be fluid, shaped by music, by heartbreak, by reinvention. Her first mentor didn't come from a record label or a Hollywood studio. He came from family. Her grandfather, Aaron Jesse Nicks, was a country musician whose own dreams of fame had never quite materialized. But he saw something in Stevie, something rare. At just 5 years old, with baby teeth still missing, Stevie stood beside her grandfather, singing harmonies for 50 cents a week. AJ taught her that music was more than melody. It was feeling, it was expression, and it was destiny. Her mother, protective and cautious, wouldn't allow AJ to take young Stevie on tour. She feared the chaos of a musician's life. But by then, the seed had been planted. Stevie's future was already written in song. By the time Stevie reached her teens, the rhythm of constant relocation had shaped her into someone both adaptable and emotionally resilient. Her family's journey took them through cities like Salt Lake, Albuquerque, and even the sprawling neighborhoods of Los Angeles. For many kids, such constant movement might have meant instability, but for Stevie, it became a silent teacher. It taught her how to adjust in unfamiliar spaces, how to read people fast, and how to reinvent herself without hesitation. In her song, Candlebright, Stevie later described herself as a nomad. It wasn't just a metaphor, it was a reflection of real life. A girl who never stayed still. She was already writing songs about sorrow and longing before she could even vote. On her 16th birthday in 1964, her parents rented her a Goya guitar. That same day, her boyfriend ended their relationship. While most teenagers would have simply cried into a pillow, Stevie picked up her guitar and did something different, she wrote. The song that came from that heartbreak wasn't sophisticated or polished, but it was raw, heartfelt, and honest. I once loved a boy who was wonderful and true, but he loved another before he loved me. It was the kind of emotional truth that would become her signature, simple words that carried weight. From that moment, her parents saw something shift. Music wasn't a pastime anymore. It was her calling. She was drawn to the girl groups of the time, the Shirelles, Martha and the Vandellas, the Shangri-Las. One song in particular, Remember, Walking in the Sand, haunted her in the best way. That blend of innocence and drama mirrored something in her. And then, layered on top of it all, was her grandfather's country influence. That mix, pop, soul, folk, and twang, laid the foundation for her unmistakable sound. Stevie Nicks didn't come from a single genre. She came from emotion. That's why her songs could live anywhere, whether beside Don Henley, Tom Petty, or even Harry Styles decades later. And then, in 1966, she heard a sound that would change everything. The voice of Lindsey Buckingham. It happened at a casual Young Life meeting, one of those social gatherings for teens looking to make friends or maybe catch a crush's eye. Lindsey Buckingham was there, playing California Dreamin' in someone's living room. Stevie, then a senior in high school, heard his voice. Without hesitation, she walked over and joined him in harmony. They had never met before, yet their voices fell into perfect sync. No awkward stumbles, no hesitation, just music. I thought he was a darling, Stevie would later say. Their blend was effortless, but then, just as quickly as it began, it ended. They didn't see each other again for 2 full years. The connection had sparked, but the timing wasn't right. Yet, by 1968, Lindsay reappeared in her life with a proposition. His band, Fritz, was looking for a new lead singer. They had started as a garage act, but their gigs were getting bigger. Stevie said yes. And suddenly, she found herself thrown into a world she wasn't prepared for: psychedelic rock, big venues, and opening slots for Janis Joplin and Jefferson Airplane. For over 3 years, Stevie was the only woman in a band of boys, and she wasn't allowed to date any of them. An unspoken rule lingered in the group. Nobody could claim her, but they didn't want outsiders near her either. If anybody in the band started spending any time with me, the other 3 would literally pick that person apart, she once said. It created a tense environment, a kind of possessive bubble that slowly wore everyone down. When Fritz finally fell apart in 1971, Stevie and Lindsay were free, musically and personally. But just as they began planning their move to Los Angeles, a twist arrived. Lindsay fell seriously ill with mononucleosis. It would keep him bedridden for nearly a year. And that's when Stevie showed what kind of partner she truly was. While Lindsay lay sick, Stevie became his everything. She cooked for him, cleaned for him, read to him, wrote songs, and mapped out their musical future, all while working part-time jobs to keep them afloat. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, but it was foundational. This was the moment they truly became a team, not just collaborators, but partners in the trenches. Their move to Los Angeles would be delayed, but the emotional groundwork was being laid. When Lindsay recovered, they packed their things and drove to LA with high hopes and a few demo tapes. They were more than ready for the big time. But what they found was something different: hardship, rejection, and a city full of people chasing the exact same dream. Their first major move was recording an album together, Buckingham Nicks, produced by Keith Olsen at Sound City Studios. It had heart. It had polish. It had everything they thought the industry wanted. But when it was released by Polydor Records in 1973, it flopped. The label dropped them. Their names faded into the background. They couldn't even afford food some nights. They shared slices of pizza. They split hamburgers. Stevie picked up waitress shifts at Bob's Big Boy and Clementine's. She cleaned houses, including the house of the very producer they were working with. She supported both of them financially, allowing Lindsay to focus completely on his guitar work. "I was totally devoted to making it happen for him," she would later say. But inside, a quiet bitterness grew. While she scrubbed floors and carried trays, he honed his craft. The dream was taking a toll. Even in failure, something quietly significant was happening. Though the Buckingham Nicks album didn't chart, it left a mark in the right circles. Their producer Keith Olsen still believed in them, even when the world didn't. He let them crash at his place when they had nowhere else to go. And in return, Stevie kept his house spotless. It was far from the life they had dreamed of, but they weren't giving up. One of Olsen's other contacts was a gifted guitarist named Waddy Wachtel. Olsen brought him in to help Lindsay improve his collaborative playing. Lindsay had always been a fiercely independent musician, almost to a fault. Waddy's presence challenged him in all the right ways. Together, they jammed, experimented, and even bonded over quiet nights playing old demo tapes. Those sessions became critical. Waddy would later play the unforgettable riff on Stevie's solo hit, Edge of 17. But back then, he was just another piece of a puzzle that was slowly forming into something bigger. They were building not just a sound, but a musical family. And then, in late 1974, fate knocked on the studio door, literally. Mick Fleetwood, drummer and founding member of Fleetwood Mac, walked into Sound City looking for a place to record. He had no idea that his next bandmates were scrubbing floors and surviving on pizza in the very building he had just entered. Olsen, ever the champion of his underdog duo, played him a track called Frozen Love from Buckingham Nicks. Mick was stunned. He loved the guitar work and the vibe. He wasn't even looking for a female vocalist. He just needed a guitarist. But when he approached Lindsay with an offer to join Fleetwood Mac, he didn't expect the answer he got. Lindsay said, "Only if Stevie comes, too." Mick Fleetwood was caught off guard. Fleetwood Mac had never considered adding a female vocalist to their lineup, especially one as distinct and forceful as Stevie. The band already had Christine McVie, and chemistry was fragile. Adding a duo, especially one with romantic history, could tip everything off balance. But Lindsay didn't waver. They were a package deal. He wasn't walking into fame without the woman who had washed floors and waited tables so he could lie on the carpet and play guitar. Stevie didn't just support him. She was integral to the sound they were creating. The band took a leap of faith. On New Year's Eve 1974, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham officially became members of Fleetwood Mac. At that moment, nobody could have predicted how much it would change the landscape of popular music. This wasn't just a new era for Fleetwood Mac. It was a rebirth. Their blend of British blues and Californian folk rock would turn out to be a golden combination. Their harmonies became iconic. Their sound instantly recognizable. But not everything was smooth. Before they could fully commit, Stevie and Lindsay had one last show booked, back in Birmingham, Alabama, a city that had once embraced them when no one else would. That night, they played to a sold-out crowd of 6,000. For Stevie, it felt poetic. The very place that had watched them struggle now watched them ascend. It was their final night as Buckingham Nicks, and the first steps into becoming legends of Fleetwood Mac. What awaited them next would be the kind of fame they had only dreamed of, but it came with a cost. In early 1976, the newly reconfigured Fleetwood Mac began working on a new album, one that would soon become a seismic cultural force. They called it Rumours. The name would prove eerily fitting. What the public didn't know was that inside the studio, every member of the band was walking through a personal storm. Stevie and Lindsay had just broken up. Christine and John McVie were going through a silent, painful divorce. And Mick Fleetwood had just learned of his wife's betrayal with his best friend. It was like recording an album inside a collapsing house. But instead of hiding the tension, they channeled it. Stevie and Lindsay's pain spilled directly into the music. He wrote "Go Your Own Way," filled with pointed lyrics like packing up, shacking up's all you want to do. Stevie hated it. She hated singing it. She hated hearing it. "I wanted to go over and hurt him," she later confessed. So she responded, not with aggression, but with poetry. Dreams was her answer. It was soft, wise, and haunting. "When the rain washes you clean, you'll know," she sang. A gentle warning, a quiet triumph. Her lyrics spoke of clarity after chaos, of healing after heartbreak. In a strange way, they were still communicating, still processing their breakup, just now through microphones and radio waves. But it didn't stop there. Stevie had written another song, Silver Springs, a deeply personal piece that captured her heartbreak with vivid intimacy. But when the album track list was finalized, the song was missing. Lindsay had pushed for it to be cut. There wasn't room, he claimed. Stevie wasn't convinced. She felt it was sabotage, a way to silence her most vulnerable expression. The song was relegated to the B-side of Go Your Own Way, almost an insult. But years later, Silver Springs would rise again, becoming a fan favorite and a painful reminder of everything unresolved between them. Despite all the chaos, Rumours wasn't just successful, it was historic. It topped the charts, sold over 21 million copies in the US alone, and won the Grammy for Album of the Year. But behind those glittering statistics was a band on the verge of implosion. In the aftermath of Rumours, Stevie Nicks stood at a crossroads. She had conquered the charts with Fleetwood Mac, but now she wanted more, something that was solely hers. So in 1981, she launched her solo career with the album Belladonna. It was a bold move, and it could have backfired, but instead it soared. Belladonna debuted at #1. It wasn't just successful, it was a declaration. Stevie Nicks was not just the mystical frontwoman of a legendary band. She was a powerhouse on her own. With songs like Edge of 17, her raspy, unmistakable voice carved a space that no one else could occupy. She collaborated with rock royalty. Tom Petty on Stop Dragging My Heart Around and Don Henley on Leather and Lace. These weren't just duets. They were statements. Stevie was now part of the pantheon. But fame, as always, carried its shadow. Her rise as a solo artist coincided with a dangerous spiral. Stevie had begun using cocaine back in the early 1970s, but by the mid-80s, the habit had taken hold in a way that was no longer recreational. It was essential. She once shared a haunting memory, working as a house cleaner in the early days. She found a line of cocaine left behind and tried it. It was, she said, a test. The test never ended. By the time she was topping charts, Stevie admitted to spending an unimaginable amount of money on drugs. Money she would later wish she had given to cancer research or to a struggling friend. But in that moment, it was survival. For 2, maybe 3 years, she said it was fun, but then it turns into a monster. Her final time using cocaine on stage came in 1986 at the Red Rocks Amphitheater. It was her breaking point. The energy that had once seemed mystical now felt manic. The stage, once her sanctuary, had become a cage built from expectations and substances. Yet the music never stopped. She released The Wild Heart in 1983 with hits like Stand Back, followed by Rock a Little in 1985. Both albums went platinum. She was recording, touring, appearing on magazine covers, and still showing up for Fleetwood Mac. But the dual identity was costing her. And so were her choices. During the band's 1977 Australian tour, a period already tense from personal rifts and exhaustion, something happened that would only further twist the emotional wires. Stevie Nicks and Mick Fleetwood became lovers. It wasn't planned. It wasn't romantic in a way people might imagine. Mick was navigating the ruins of his marriage. Stevie was still emotionally raw from her breakup with Lindsay. They were two people in pain who sought comfort in each other. And in that vulnerability, a new entanglement began. But it didn't fix anything. Instead, it made things messier. The affair fractured relationships within the band even further. Christine McVie was furious. Lindsay felt betrayed. And Stevie, already overwhelmed by drugs, fame, and expectations, found herself spiraling into deeper chaos. By the late 1980s, she knew she needed help. She sought out a psychiatrist, desperate for something, anything that could pull her away from the edge. That's when Clonazepam entered her life, marketed as a safer alternative to cocaine. It came in a bottle with a prescription label and the illusion of control. What she didn't know, what no one warned her about, was that this new drug would consume her in ways even worse than the one she thought she was escaping. Clonazepam felt safe. It was doctor-prescribed, legal, and promised to calm the nerves. At first it did. It made Stevie feel centered, even stable. But soon, it began stealing pieces of her, quietly and cruelly. Her creativity dulled. Her energy drained. Her voice, once bursting with power, began to shake. She gained weight, her body bloated, and fans noticed. But worse than the physical toll was the emotional one. She wasn't Stevie anymore. She was a shell. She had traded one dependency for another. By the early 1990s, she knew it had to end. But quitting Clonazepam wasn't like walking away from cocaine. It wasn't psychological. It was physical torment. Her detox lasted 47 days. Every hour felt like war. Her body rebelled in ways she didn't know were possible. Her hair turned gray. Her skin peeled. Her legs cramped until she couldn't walk. Sleep vanished. Thoughts blurred. She described it as a kind of death. She didn't go to a clinic. She didn't check into a fancy rehab. She stayed home, alone. No staff, no headlines, just her fighting a monster in silence. She didn't do it for the press. She did it because she had to, because if she didn't, she wouldn't survive. The 47 days of detox were brutal, but they gave her back something that had been missing, her strength. It was a resurrection, but not the last one she'd need. Years passed. Stevie recovered. She reemerged stronger, older, wiser. But life still had another chapter to write, one involving the man who had once sung with her in someone's living room, the man whose guitar had once matched her voice perfectly. Lindsey Buckingham. In 2018, Fleetwood Mac was being honored at the Music Cares Person of the Year ceremony. It should have been a celebration, a full-circle moment. But behind the scenes, the band was once again unraveling. Tensions had been rising about the tour, about the set list, about priorities. Then came the moment. Lindsay acted out at the event. He was curt. He rolled his eyes during Stevie's speech. Millions saw it. It was petty. It was public. And for Stevie, it was the final straw. In that moment, she heard her mother's voice in her mind, asking, "Are you really going to spend the next 15 years of your life with this man?" Then her father's voice followed. "It's time to get a divorce." It wasn't just a memory. It felt like truth. She didn't tell anyone right away. She smiled through the event. But inside, the decision had already been made. "It happened in my head," she later said, before the ceremony even ended. What happened after that Music Care ceremony wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of decades. Decades of creative brilliance, yes, but also decades of tension, dismissal, and emotional fatigue. Stevie had endured many storms, but this one was different. This wasn't about chart positions or solo albums or artistic disagreements. It was about respect. And in front of millions, Lindsay had rolled his eyes, dismissively, publicly, while she was being honored. That small gesture wasn't small to her. It captured everything she had silently fought for. That gesture was her confirmation. After the event, Stevie approached the band and didn't sugarcoat it. "It's him or me," she said. There was no negotiation, no drawn-out discussion. Her voice was clear. She wasn't bluffing. Fleetwood Mac had a choice to make. Lindsay later admitted that he was blindsided. He insisted that the decision wasn't mutual, that Stevie had orchestrated the entire thing. For him, it wasn't about ego, it was about justice. He sued the band, citing breach of contract, pointing to lost earnings from a planned farewell tour he would now miss. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was legal. Millions were at stake. The lawsuit grabbed headlines. Some fans were confused. Others took sides. But behind the scenes, a quiet deal was reached. By the end of 2018, the case was settled out of court. No winner, no clear victory, just silence. But Stevie's silence didn't last. In 2021, Stevie Nicks spoke publicly about the split with a clarity that couldn't be ignored. She called Lindsay's version of events revisionist history. She wasn't going to let his narrative define her. The truth, she said, was simple. His behavior had become toxic. This wasn't about jealousy or old wounds. It wasn't about fame or control. It was about survival. For decades, Stevie had shared stages with Lindsay. She had written about him, sung with him, fought beside him. But somewhere along the road, the partnership had eroded into something sharp and corrosive, and she wasn't going to carry it any longer. Lindsay responded with a low blow. He told Rolling Stone that Stevie had never gotten over the fact that he married late in life, suggesting that her actions were rooted in jealousy. It was a statement that struck a nerve, not just for Stevie, but for everyone who had watched her carry herself with grace through unimaginable challenges. Her silence turned to strength. Stevie didn't clap back. She didn't spiral. She kept moving forward. Fleetwood Mac, now without Lindsay, brought in 2 new musicians to replace him. Mike Campbell, formerly of Tom Petty's Heartbreakers, and Neil Finn from Crowded House. Two seasoned, brilliant artists who brought new energy to the band. Lindsay mocked the move. He called Fleetwood Mac a cover band, said it wasn't real without him. But Stevie knew better. This wasn't about replicating the past. It was about refusing to let it cage them. In 2021, Stevie Nicks spoke publicly about the split with a clarity that couldn't be ignored. She called Lindsay's version of events revisionist history. She wasn't going to let his narrative define her. The truth, she said, was simple. His behavior had become toxic. This wasn't about jealousy or old wounds. It wasn't about fame or control. It was about survival. For decades, Stevie had shared stages with Lindsay. She had written about him, sung with him, fought beside him. But somewhere along the road, the partnership had eroded into something sharp and corrosive. And she wasn't going to carry it any longer. Lindsay responded with a low blow. He told Rolling Stone that Stevie had never gotten over the fact that he married late in life, suggesting that her actions were rooted in jealousy. It was a statement that struck a nerve, not just for Stevie, but for everyone who had watched her carry herself with grace through unimaginable challenges. Her silence turned to strength. Stevie didn't clap back. She didn't spiral. She kept moving forward. Fleetwood Mac, now without Lindsay, brought in two new musicians to replace him. Mike Campbell, formerly of Tom Petty's Heartbreakers, and Neil Finn from Crowded House. Two seasoned, brilliant artists who brought new energy to the band. Lindsay mocked the move. He called Fleetwood Mac a cover band, said it wasn't real without him. But Stevie knew better. This wasn't about replicating the past. It was about refusing to let it cage them.